at bizarro times of record high new car prices, record high used car prices, record high dealer margins, and many other things. And all these talk about shortages. Before we get into it, so the second half of the panel will take questions from everyone in the audience, as well as about a dozen people online that are following in. If there's any feedback afterwards, both from the in-person presentation as well as the virtual component, please let us know. Most importantly, thank you to our panelists for agreeing to this discussion. Michelle Krebs to my left is the executive analyst for Cox Automotive. Reported the chief economist. Michelle has been a central contributor to the entire Cox Automotive team, helping shape the company's understanding of the complexities of the auto business and steer the Cox Automotive narratives. Based in Detroit, Michelle is an award-winning automotive journalist and joined Auto Trader in 2014. Before that, she was a senior analyst and editor for Edmunds.com. And in her automotive career, she ran a successful editorial services business that included reviewing cars for the New York Times and served as a reporter and editor for industry trade journal Automotive News. One difference between Michelle and the rest of our panelists is she did not graduate from Michigan State. Or Michigan at all, so at least you're not a rival.
Go green.
Go white. They stick together. In the middle is Dave Sloan. Dave is the president of the CATA and general manager of the Chicago Auto Show. He's been in this role since 2010. His automotive career started in PR at General Motors, and after a short stint at Golden Harris PR on the Chrysler account, he came to Jerry Sizek's job offers and joined CATA in 1993 as executive VP. To our left, man with a beautiful haircut, and also our sponsor, Tony Macrito, is the director of external communications at CDK Global, a leading provider of retail technology solutions that help dealers and OEMs run their businesses more efficiently, drive profitability, and create frictionless buying and ownership experiences for consumers. More than 15 years of experience in PR with well-known companies across automotive, entertainment, tech, and e-commerce industries. Like Dave, he worked at GM supporting regional auto shows, product launches, and community initiatives in the Midwest. He also worked at Harley Davidson, helping tell the business's story through key influencers, top-tier media, and external speaking opportunities. Combined, you all have like more than 60 years of automotive experience.
Oh, way more than that.
Most of them.
40 ourselves.
In those decades, have you ever witnessed a time like this?
No.
What is happening? What will happen? So these are the things we're going to cover. The chip shortage, I'm going to start there. It's affecting not only supply and demand, but how consumers are buying cars and what they can get. And there's features that are going missing even on, and most of them are inessential, but even on like six-figure luxury cars. Like BMW announced recently that they're like on the X5 and the X7, no more touchscreens. There's still going to be a screen with just no touch component because of the chip shortage. So you can still use voice commands, you can still use the wacky console dial. And shoppers instead will get a $500 credit instead of a touchscreen. It's odd. Honda bumped up, after 5 months of production, Honda bumped up the Odyssey from 21 to 22 because they couldn't equip the top models with a Honda back. I didn't know that feature was so important. It was only on the Touring and Elite trims. But it has an effect on how companies are doing business and also what consumers can have. GM also suspended Super Cruise, their hands-free driving, their limited hands-free driving system. In vehicles such as the Escalade, they also delayed rollout in all these other vehicles that they promised, including the CT5. Some GM trucks no longer come with cylinder deactivation and V8 engines, which cuts the half the cylinders down so you can save fuel. Some analysts are forecasting a chip shortage until 2023. Seems like a long time, especially coming out of the pandemic. So, Michelle, what does it all mean? What could be the net effect on the new and used car markets?
Well, we have to kind of go back because the chip shortage didn't happen in and of itself. It started with the pandemic. And I think what we're going to see is a lot of lessons learned, a lot of changes in what we're doing, how business works as a result of the pandemic and the chip shortage and the inventory shortage. So just for context, we have, like you said, never seen this in our careers in terms of the low amount of inventory. So I look at inventory numbers every Tuesday. We have less than 1 million vehicles available to buy across the United States. We haven't seen that probably since the 1980s. And for context, if you remember the cash for clunkers time, there was a big shortage. We were at 1.4 million. We thought that was low. So it's simple economics, and there's low supply, there's very high demand because the buyers, and there's a lot of buyers out there. Their car vehicles are old, average age is well over 12 years. People have stacked up money because they aren't going on vacation overseas, or they're not, buying other things. It's really good. So, and they're taking a lot more road trips. So there's high demand, low supply, record high prices. We think that the chip shortage should ease for next year. We got a big pipeline. So it's going to take time to get back to normal, whatever that is. And the vehicle, you talk about the vehicles that don't have the features you talked about, but what we are building and why average transaction prices are so high, a press release out on that today, is what we're building is very expensive things. It's because automakers want to make big margins, dealers want to make margins. So we're building pickup trucks and SUVs and highest content that they can do. And we also have nothing left over in inventory. Normally this time of year, this is when you get the bargains for the previous year's inventory. It doesn't exist. So it's all new stuff.
You go past, anyone that's driven past the dealer lot has seen emptiness, which is unusual. Dave, how are dealers coping with the imbalance of the lack of supply?
Well, it's like Michelle said, it's been a roller coaster. It started with the pandemic going down, and they installed plastic everywhere, and everyone got masks, and were defogging the interiors of cars. I mean, just think about all that stuff that they reacted to. And then all of a sudden, everyone who was sitting in their living rooms decided, oh my gosh, when I go back to work, I don't want to be on the train or getting in an Uber with a stranger. I need to have a car. And so then demand went nuts. And then of course the chip shortage, we started hearing those stories of the chip shortage. And it's the moving line always seems to be, well, we'll find out, it'll be better next month. It'll be better at the end of the fall. It'll be better. And it just seems like the finish line keeps moving. And so dealers with not much inventory and high demand started getting crazy prices for their vehicles. And I've heard dealers joke, I never knew I was such a good dealer. They can't believe what people are willing to spend on vehicles, and without having a lot of inventory, dealers are very resourceful, and they go at it lots of different ways. I was talking to a number of dealers this week, one who saw what was coming and decided to invest heavily in used. And he decided a year ago he was going to start buying off of front lawns and going to the auction in Topeka, Kansas, and spending a lot of time getting a lot of used vehicles. So he normally would have an inventory of, say, $1.75 to $2 million in used, and now he's up to $5 million in used, and has kept it at that level. And so he's doubled the number of used vehicles that he sold off of his lot. Not a huge dealer, but good, probably a 75% dealer. Not a huge dealer, but not a small one either, and a successful one. And the other thing that he did was he wanted to make sure that the used vehicle buying process was as much like the new vehicle, the delivery. It was going to have a full tank of gas like the manufacturers require. The customer process, the buying process, customer experience is going to be the same. And he's been very successful. And then I talked to another dealer who went in it totally differently. He's kept the focus on new, but he hasn't raised prices or gone after the huge margins. His focus is on selling to zero every month. And he's been accused by other dealers of getting more vehicles from the manufacturers, but no, it's just the way he's selling so that he doesn't have anything on the lot at the end of the month, and he gets his allocation, the full allocation every month, and that's been very successful for him. He's focusing on the trade, always putting more into the trade to keep his customers happy and making sure he gets good used cars, but focusing on lease turn-ins and trades rather than buying off someone's front lawn.
Seems like some of the things that are happening, this idea of running lean, can they stick around? Can these practices be more sustainable in the future?
Sure. Well, you've seen that with Ford saying from the manufacturer they're going to do that. And there, I think, check me if I'm wrong, and if anyone knows differently, are they the only manufacturer that is offering incentives on people who come in and order a car? So Farley has said that he likes the idea of these lean dealer inventories, and they'd like to go more to the ever elusive build of order, and so they are incentivizing customers to come in and order a car. Like, as one older dealer told me one time, it was like that in the 1970s when interest rates were 19%. Nobody could have any inventory. No dealers could afford to have inventory. So they encourage people to come in and order cars and not have buy off the lot. So.
And this idea of ordering cars or whatever the new normal might be, tell me if you can address this. You had mentioned when we spoke before this about you think that it's critical that dealers not ignore digital retailing because their business margins are good. So what might be this new model moving forward?
Well, I think, we talk a lot about the industry and the dealer business being supply and demand, right? And that is the case today. But if we look at what was happening even before the pandemic hit, the consumer habits have been changing, right? With the advent of the Amazons of the world, simple and convenient have been, the name of the game. And that started from an automotive retailer perspective even before the pandemic hit. But once the pandemic hit, it accelerated all that, right? Because everybody kind of freaked out a little bit and says, okay, I'm staying home, I'm not going into a dealership, I want to buy a car, can I do it from my couch? Like that started accelerating kind of the tools that dealers were putting in place to make sure that their retailing processes were as seamless as possible. Because if you look at it from where I come from CDK, we build the software and provide the hardware to dealers to be able to stitch together their end-to-end processes, right? So if the software is not talking to each other very well, there's friction in the process. And so somebody can start shopping from a website or a marketplace from their couch, but when they actually want to go in and look at a car or at whatever part down the path they are, where they say, okay, I've done as much as I want to do online. I need to talk to somebody face to face, or I need to go touch and feel this car.
Did you mention an auto show in that?
No, but I will. Tomorrow. But the point is, like, to be able to pick up where you left off at any point in the process is something that hasn't necessarily been something that consumers can do, and I think it's getting there. So I think what the new normal is, it's not just about supply and demand, because God willing, supply is going to come back. Even if it doesn't come back in the numbers that were pre-pandemic or pre-chip shortage, there are going to be more cars to buy, at some point. Then it's going to be about what kind of experience can these dealers provide their consumers to make sure they're meeting them where they are and where they want to buy. And so right now when the margins are higher than they've probably ever been, you have more historical context for me. But, what happens then if business is good, sometimes dealers say, well, I don't need to invest in this next thing because I'm already making the money. This is all good, but you don't fix your roof while the rain's coming down on top of the house. You invest in it and you fix it before the rain comes. And I feel like in some way, shape, or form that rain is going to come, and then dealers are going to have to figure out, okay, how do I adapt to this new normal of how consumers?
I just add too, we do the study, to Tony's point, we do the study every year called the Car Buyer Journey. And for years, all the years I've worked at Cox Automotive, they've said, yes, we want to do more of it online. We want to do more of it online. The pandemic comes, they get to do more of it online. And the customer satisfaction is crazy. I mean, 81% of the people we surveyed said when I bought a car that, no, 70-something percent, check me on that. That it was a much more satisfying experience for them and help dealers be more efficient as well. It's about the customer being
right. Yeah. So with the idea of customer happiness and the inevitable supply returning at what levels we don't know, there's a lot of cost considerations that are happening in addition to the price of new cars or even used cars, but also used car prices 40% higher since the pandemic began. Gas prices are now up 74% since their low in May of 2020. The average transaction price exceeded 41,000, which your estimate might be higher. I don't know, 46.
The average, oh, used?
New.
It's over
46,000, like what?
More money.
Oh man, Maverick would be better. All right, so 46,000 exceeded what I read. And the thing that I'm very curious about, and we've kind of touched on it, but if you can explore a little bit more, Dave, to start. In July, the average dealer margin per unit was $4,260, which might not sound like that much money, but per car sold, it usually hovers, I believe, between $2,000 and $2,500. It was the first time in history that the metric surpassed $4,000 in a single month. So it seems like dealers are making up for lack of volume with higher end vehicles. What is going on with these margins? What does this mean for me getting my 16-year-old daughter a new car? Good luck.
Well, but it's not just higher in, well, you said before, that's what the manufacturers want to make so that they can make their margin. So that's what's being delivered. But, as I said, customers are ordering cars. And so they're not necessarily buying what's on the dealer lot. Dealers are going to know, they know if they only have this many vehicles on the lot, they need to get a better price for what they have. And customers are willing to pay because they know there's not much inventory out there. And there aren't that many incentives. It's a perfect storm.
And I mean, the basic economics 101. Are willing to pay it.
Father Guido Sarducci,
Yeah.
Supply and demand.
That's right. Can you talk briefly before I ask our other panelists, what is going on with the destination fees?
What is going on with the destination?
Can anyone tell me what's going on with
Those
the
are charged by
destination fees?
manufacturers, I think.
They are.
Okay. I don't know the explanation.
It's a way to increase price without it, looking like it increases the price. You still have to pay it.
They're all higher.
Yes, much higher.
Everyone I've seen, especially domestic automakers with SUVs and the trucks, some of them are $1,795. Not going to.
I would also say too, you just mentioned it, gas prices are way up. There's a huge shortage of truck drivers. Labor costs are up, so their cost for transportation is more. Shipping costs of parts and vehicles coming from overseas just far higher. So there is some of that, but increasing the destination fee has always been a way to increase the price without increasing the MSR.
Without having to publicize it.
Yes.
All right, so supply is going to come back, which would tell Father Sarducci and I that the new car prices should plateau, yes? At some point, any idea what it'll take for these car prices to taper off?
More supply. And also a different mix. I mean, at some point, we're going to have to build vehicles that are in the more affordable range, under $6,000. So that will change as well. But I think we need to get used to higher prices. Maybe not record high prices. It's like when gas prices go up, they taper, but we get used to that higher level.
And this has happened before, where some automakers have been poised to sell entry-level cars, dating back to 2013, where some automakers weren't prepared for selling large gas-guzzling SUVs. It seems to have been swinging back the other way.
Well, I was wondering, to your point, whether, I really haven't read this anywhere, but will that be the opening for the Chinese that Chinese we've heard have been coming to the United States since 2005 or something like that, and then they just never come other than through established automakers, buying established automakers. But will that lower end, that lower price, give that opening that Chinese manufacturers need to come into the United States?
Vietnamese now too. So.
Right.
UID has been coming to America for 2 decades.
Yeah.
All right, so Tony, with that in mind, consumers are willing to pay because we're paying. Now there might be a limited supply, but what do consumers want, and how can OEMs and dealers deliver that?
Well, I'll go back to the experience. I think number one, I think it's the experience that they have buying. If you can remove the friction, you can make it more simple, more convenient. They're gonna go back to the dealer that can provide, given supply comes back. I think the other thing that you have to look at on the retail side is the value that the dealer provides. They are the sort of, lack of a better phrase, they're the centers of their community, their employers. They have relationships. What we've seen is that relationships matter, even if technology advances, right? So having them there, what's the value that they can provide aside from, saving people from talking to 8 people in 3 different departments and having an 8-hour deal? What else can they do to continue to thrive? And one of the things that we're looking at is helping dealers own the entire car buying and ownership experience. So it's not just going there to buy the car, transacting it out. There's a service component where dealers make a good amount of money. So keeping that relationship there for them. And it's also about providing them things that maybe the dealers haven't provided them before. One of the companies we just recently bought called Salty, they're an embedded insurance provider. So if somebody can go into a dealership, they can make the deal on the car, and in between the time that they have made the deal on the car before they go in the F&I office, they can get a text message from the dealer system to say, hey, we can get you, we can use our embedded intelligence, artificial intelligence, to get you the best quote based on your information. And you can get a bindable quote right now while you're waiting. Now, a lot of people that go into a dealership and buy a car, they could previously come in with an insurance policy and just kind of carry it over, but it's not whether that consumer buys the insurance right there. It's giving them that peace of mind that, hey, maybe the insurance that I have and the price that I'm paying is good. Okay, yeah, you provided some value to me today. Or they can say, you know what, I like this better. Why don't I jump here, save a few bucks? That dealer gets value and that consumer gets value out of that too. So it's what other things? EVs are coming, charging infrastructures, financing. Like, there are other things that dealers can do to help the consumer to continue to be that center of the community for them, and to be essentially, that person or that place on the ground for the OEMs. I think it's important.
I mean, the studies that we show that consumers don't necessarily want dealerships to go away. They just want to do something different there. They want a lot more time on the technology. We have an EV adoption study coming out next week, and even though you think EV owners, contenders would just know a lot about the vehicle. They want someone there to walk them through that. So it's, how do you spend the time in the dealership versus, or how do you do it now? More about the product.
Yeah, and that's been one of the criticisms about EVs so far, is that there seems to be a dealer reluctance for some, at least anecdotally. And so Dave, one of the electric vehicle startups ranging from Tesla to Lucid to Rivian, Polestar, they're suggesting they can do away with the traditional dealer model, and that they're promising things like delivering the car to your house. Something goes wrong with the car, they'll come out there and they'll fix it. It sounds great. It sounds like not having to leave your home. We've all gotten pretty used to it in the pandemic. It doesn't sound like a bad thing. But traditionally, what is the dealer model? How does it serve the consumer, and what does that mean moving forward?
Well, obviously, the lifetime of the vehicle, to have a place where you can go get it serviced, you buy it and check out the service department, and you're shopping for a dealer as much as you're shopping for a car. Is this a place where I want to come get my car serviced for the entire life of the car, at least the life of the warranty? I would argue that when Tesla came into our building in 2011 and talked about the fact that they didn't need service departments because they were making electric cars, and they found that cars are great, even electric cars are great. And if you look on the forums, they can't build service. Talk to me about the Tesla Rangers, but they can't build service locations fast enough. And I think Rivian will find out the same thing. And we, of course, there's been a lot made about dealer associations trying to make sure that Tesla and Rivian sell cars through dealerships. We're not looking for them to stop selling cars. It's franchise dealer. And Tesla was as great as they're doing now with the wild speculation. They were 2 weeks from bankruptcy according to Elon Musk. And I'd argue that he had a whole lot easier way to go if he had franchised a bunch of dealerships around the country and all that real estate and a lot of those customer problems that he was having and so on, and certainly the delivery problems. Anyway, it seems like there's something about electric vehicles and direct selling that are somehow married, and I'm not sure why that is, but it's an interesting thing that it seems even the legacy manufacturers like the idea of selling electric vehicles, at least trying to appear that they're selling electric vehicles directly to consumers, taking reservations, and so on and so forth. But so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But I mean, states have an obligation to consumers to regulate the car purchase process. I mean, you don't want to have a 5,000-pound paperweight in your driveway. And Michelle mentioned Thailand. There's 100 companies making cars in China. And you might want to do business with the top 20, maybe the top 50, but maybe not the bottom 50. And if you can now sell cars direct wherever you want to off the internet in the United States, there's going to be a lot of paperweights and a lot of driveways. So there better be some regulation involved. That's for sure. And that franchise laws are the way that states regulate the car purchase process in individual states.
Okay. With this idea of future 5,000-pound paperwork weights, this is the last question I'm going to ask before opening it up to you all here and anyone online. Longer-term trends, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, what do we see? What do you think? What's your crystal ball say?
Well, we'll see a lot more EVs. We'll eventually see autonomous vehicles. I think we're going to first see them in commercial fleets, trucks, and places. I think we're going to see the automakers rethink distribution. Maybe it's through dealerships, but in a much more efficient way, and EVs will be an experiment. I think we're going to see the automakers look a lot harder at their supply chains. We're already seeing that, and you can already tell the effect of that because you didn't hear about a lot of U.S. built battery plants before all this happened. Now we are hearing about that, so I think that's going to be a big thing for the world.
Those battery plants, including like Gigafactory for Tesla.
SK innovation.
Sonic's got one, right?
I can't keep track. Every day there's a new one out, which is venture.
Gentlemen, any thought on the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, if you look at, what's happening now, what we're building and others are building to get 3 to 5 years from now, like this is your car. This is going to be the cousin of your car. The data is going to be key for improving all of that customer experience and consumer experience, whether it's buying or owning. I mean, if you look at all the data that's out there in the automotive industry, there are 50 or so sensors within a car that shoot data back and forth. You've got all the data that dealers have, whether it's purchase data, CRM data, service data. You've got data from the OEMs about their vehicle build data. Right now, a lot of it is being left dormant and nobody's able to untangle it to make sense. And taking that data and being intelligent about what that data is trying to tell either the OEM, the dealer, the consumer. I mean, we've seen it in healthcare. Like, I know what my heart rate is. I know, how many steps I take in a day. Like, this is all at my fingertips, and I'm using that to make my life easier. And there are other companies that are trying to make our lives easier through the data that they're getting from us. So one thing I do think is that that's going to continue to evolve and grow, and data standards within the industry coming together and sharing data together. If it's not, obviously that data can get scrubbed and anonymized, and you can take all of the essence of that data to tell you certain things that can help drive business, drive better experiences. I think that's going to be key to watch out for over the course of the next.
I'm starting to worry that Tony knows too much about me.
Well, whatever the case, Automotive 2.0 is fascinating to say the least, and it has begun. Thank you guys. Questions?
I know that Robert mentioned at the top that some analysts say that the chip shortage could go to 2023. I think that is really far off. Are you buying into that, or do you think we have some hope here in 2022?
Well, I think it'll improve. It won't be fully back to normal, I think. And also, even if we got a lot of chips, we still have huge pipeline. So we expect that there will still be inventory shortages through next year, but will improve progressively.
So, right. So it's not necessarily the chip shortage will last that long, but the inventory shortage might. So that because of the high demand and because of everything that's going on, dealers won't have sort of normal levels of inventory until that time. Let's hope.
And what we're seeing is when a company, Ford's a good example, in October, got some extra inventory, it gets snapped up right away. So that's going to take a while to get some out.
Can I ask one more question? It's okay. What is it that we're not talking about? We know about the chip shortage, we know about the trucker shortage, we know about the supply issues. Is there something cooking that you guys are keeping tabs on that we haven't really talked about?
I think, what other shortage is there? There's some rumblings right now about there's a shortage of magnesium because it's made in China, and it takes a lot of energy to make magnesium, and they have some energy issues. So, I mean, we in our forecast last year, we knew there was going to be some kind of supply disruption. So we were very conservative in our forecast. We had no idea it was chips. no idea the extent of it. So the unknown is the little scary part. And we know there are very high prices of commodities, and so yeah, what we don't know is the little worrisome thing.
Well, and then the other thing we did talk about was what these online used car companies are doing to the price of vehicles. And then just Hertz, you know, Hertz sold off their entire fleet when they went through bankruptcy, and now they're trying to buy it back in used car auctions. And one dealer said to me, if Hertz is in the lane, I'm leaving, because they're paying too much money per car.
And that's why we're seeing wholesale prices at record levels right now of what's being paid for.
Exactly, and now you're starting to hear, you know, with Carvana, have you ever looked at the BBB reviews at Carvana? Because of the way they sell vehicles, you might buy a vehicle from somebody in Georgia, and Carvana probably isn't holding the title of that vehicle, so you're not going to get it real quick. So you have to go back and get a temporary plate 3 or 4 times before you get your title, because, and now they're starting to get in trouble with regulators. And it's just their business model, and they're not doing anything sinister. It's just the way they're trying to do their business, and because of this, it's probably exacerbated by the high demand, and so there's going to start to be some reckoning on regulatory with these online used car services that are selling all over the country, I think.
Thank you.
Well, to add on to that, you know, the reason why those have gained traction, again, simplicity and convenience, but they are only used cars. So how do you get that experience if you want to buy a new car, right? Like that's not offered by those. You can only do that through a dealer, through, you know, an OEM to a certain extent. So, I mean, that's going to be the challenge. There are a lot of regulations for selling new cars, and we've got to make that easier for those new cars to be sold in that fashion.
Kind of piggybacking on Jennifer's question, I'm just curious if you have a sense as to the nature of the recovery. Is it just going to be this very gradual ramping up, or are there any situations that will, all of a sudden we've got, you know, full truckloads of cars that are being, is it going to be just a gradual ramp up again over a 6-month or more period? Is that how the recovery is going to look like?
You mean the recovery in auto?
Yeah, in terms of inventory levels and.
That's our view. It'll be a gradually through next year. It'll improve through next year.
So it might not be quite as bad a time, though still not normal, not quite as bad a time to buy 6 months.
That's our view at the moment.
At the moment is the key part.
I just thought to go back to the question about like the dealership experience and so on. I know that for a lot of like consumers, there's despair at like high dealer markups for certain vehicles. I mean, obviously for like limited editions or for like in demand things. Like it's understandable why it's business that has to make money. You want to capitalize on that. But I think for a lot of people, the general air for consumers is that they don't like when dealerships like seemingly want mark up things to an extreme extent. And I guess do you think that there's any way to, like you said, with like the franchise laws and or something else that the automakers can do to maybe limit this sort of the seemingly insane markup that some people have?
Well, they try, and you know, it's interesting. Our general counsel was talking to a Ferrari dealer in town, who was trying to put together a piece of paperwork that said, okay, if you buy this car from me, and then you sell it within 3 months. So I'm selling a Ferrari to you, and you're going to go and sell that a couple months from now for this much more. And that dealer was trying to write into that so he could have the right of first refusal, just so he'd have another crack at it. And you see that. You saw it with the Ford GT when it came out. that Ford was trying to make sure that those first buyers of that GT, and it was in such limited supply, they were gonna hold on to it. And they weren't just gonna make, but that's economics, right? That's Father Guido Sarducci of supply and demand. These cars are in very high demand. And that's why it's called, as Barry Belichick said in the Automotive News this week, manufacturers suggested retail price. But if demand is higher, how can you argue against the dealer who wants to charge more when for the last 10 years it's been it starts at MSRP and usually goes down. So it's a tough situation. Now there are some dealers who are, hey, I'm a member of this community. These are my customers. I'm not going to hit them up for another $500 or $1,000 or $5,000 over MSRP. I'm going to sell them at MSRP and I'm going to be happy. And so just like any business, you're going to shop around and look for that dealer.
Dave, if I could just add to that too, I think what's interesting to your question, and just to kind of piggyback on what Dave's saying, is that's the benefit though of the franchise model, and you do have the competition, right? So, you have the ability to shop around if that dealer is charging too much. So you think about the manufacturers who are just charging cost. I mean, what are their markups? Consumers don't have that benefit to shop around at that, in the case of Rivian or Tesla.
Yeah, I heard Tesla raised prices of the Model Y and the 3 twice last month.
For the 100th time.
Yeah.
I would say though that aside from now, we think affordability for the average American is going to become a serious issue. We've been saying that long before it's become a really real. There are just so many people that are frozen out of the new car market, and now even the used car market. There are a couple interesting statistics that we pulled together. In 2012, 54% of all vehicles sold cost under $30,000, and now only 21%. If you look at the high end, in 2021, only 6% of vehicles sold cost over $50,000. Today, 28% are. The average household income is still in that $65,000 range. So, as a society, it's going to be interesting in how we deal with that.
It's interesting too that with electric vehicles, the way that they're going to get into the market is at the high end. They're a 9,000-pound Hummer rather than, the Nissan Leaf. Isn't that interesting?
And to proliferate EVs, if that's what we want to do as a society, price is the main obstacle. Our EV study that comes out next week, it shows that people are less concerned about range. They're less concerned about the infrastructure than they were before. But price is the biggest obstacle. Now, granted, there aren't that many out there, the ones that are out there, and we'll get a wider array in prices and styles.
But if so if you're and there's a lot of newcomers coming into that EV market, and they're all coming in at the high end. And it seems that if somebody came in at the low end, they'd have it all to themselves.
That sounds like a case for China.
There you go.
Well, or also, we may, one of the trends of the future is we may acquire transportation in a totally different way. We may not just buy a vehicle. We may lease the battery of an EV. We have a subscription business that's been mostly for high-end vehicles, but maybe there's a way to do that. I think the way we acquire transportation can have to change to make it affordable for the masses.
No question, things are in transition. Jen, are there any?
There are some.
There are some. Okay, let's
Do you want to take some of you? Okay, with consumers purchasing and financing vehicles at peak prices, what happens to those folks when prices normalize? Down the road, 2 to 3 years, will there be a large number of car shoppers sidelined by being seriously upside down on their loans?
Well, I would say one thing. I mean, we expect used car prices to stay very strong because we aren't feeding that pipeline either. We aren't taking a ton of trade-ins. We aren't getting a lot of lease backs. A lot of leases are being extended. The rental car companies are buying. They're not selling. So we expect through probably at at least 2024, the used car prices will remain very high, so their residual values will still be strong. Not that answers the question exactly, but.
Any other questions from Dave?
Just a question in general. Another headwind probably coming our way is higher interest rates. It's a wild card, but it's trending upwards. And with big purchases, higher interest rates play a big factor. How are potentially higher interest rates to affect the mix in the next couple of years?
I would just say the lower interest rates have helped offset the higher cost of vehicles.
Exactly.
So that's been a benefit lately.
Right. But when the interest rates creep up, 1-2%, which is going to happen eventually, if they happen sooner rather than later, what impact do you think that's going to have on those high, transaction costs for the vehicles?
Certainly will raise the monthly payment, and we do an affordability index. It's the worst it's ever been, and so that could impact. The other thing is if demand does soften, we still have the ability to incentives, subsidize 0% financing, some subsidizing leases, that kind of thing. I don't know exactly. We haven't really modeled that.
Hopefully the supply will be greater so that we can offset the already high prices, and then we'll start to be more incentivizing. I'm going to see if there's one more and then I'll come back to you.
Yeah, there's a couple related. So basically, the question is about regulation and sales, both used and new. What do you forecast as the next immediate steps in terms of regulation?
The next immediate step for.
I think what they're asking is people who are, you mentioned the regulation by states. Do you see that,
Well, it wouldn't be more regulation, but just cracking down on the length of time for a buyer of a used car to get their title. I just think the regulators will crack down on them. I don't think there'll be new regulations.
And then kind of piggyback on that, what do you see the next dealer model for car sales becoming? I think Tony was talking a lot about, just how it's evolving and maybe you can shed some light.
I think, one of the things that we're also seeing that's a pain point for dealers is staffing. It's staffing and employee burnout, right? So going into the pandemic, some of those dealers had to let go of employees that they didn't end up hiring back, when things started to come back. So it's how do you do not more with less, but how do you do the same, if not more, in a different way? And so, the technologies and tools that dealers have at their disposal are allowing them to do things differently. Maybe instead of having a dedicated salesperson, there's somebody who's more of a concierge. I was at a dealer meeting with Cadillac when I was at GM, had to be 10 or 12 years ago, where they brought in the customer experience team from the Ritz-Carlton to, tell their dealers like best practices on how to treat your guests. And I'm hearing a lot more dealers using the term guests as opposed to customer or buyer, right? So it's like, how do you become this concierge for the consumer that you don't have to pass them off from person to person and department to department? Maybe they're doing more high value work to maintain and build those relationships, and that can have an impact on all areas of business, including service. Because then, if you're having a great experience, then for the life of that vehicle, you're going to bring that car back to the service by the service department.
The other trend we're seeing is a tremendous amount of consolidation. The big guys are buying up everything, even other big guys.
Yeah.
So that's a huge trend.
Out of respect to our panelists and to you all, we have time for one more question. Jen, is there anything you're seeing online that hasn't been covered? Anyone else? Anything we haven't covered, Larry?
Can you attach demographics to the people who are usually buying online? I can think of it would be, but.
Well, definitely it's favored by younger people. I don't know if we make that survey.
No, but I would say that buying online, that's a general term
Yeah.
because, there are a lot of people that start online and somewhere throughout that journey end up in a dealership. Very few, I think less than 1% of people are actually buying online and not stepping foot on a showroom floor. It's expected, I think it's 2025, that that'll be up to 7%. But, that sets a trend that people are thinking, people aren't going to go back to the showroom again. And we wholeheartedly don't believe that because it is the relationships that matter with the dealer. And sometimes there is a point where people want to jump off and have that omni-channel experience as opposed to just an online experience versus a showroom.
You're spending $100 to order a pair of shoes, not try them on, that's fine. $46,000 to buy a car without test driving it seems like a reach. Some people believe in the interwebs, others don't. Thank you all for your time and your insights. A lot of great points. Thank you all for coming. So this has been recorded. It'll be available on the cloud. We'll send out a follow-up email tomorrow or early next week with the link to the recording if you guys want it. Again, thanks for coming. For Mama members, welcome as well. We welcome you guys. For Mama members, both online and in person, we are in discussion for resurrecting a holiday party. Tentatively, it might be in the drive shop garage. We will keep you posted. It should be a good time. Mark Felix is going to dress up as Santa Claus. But that's what we got going on. Thank you all for coming. Thank you guys.
Oh, did you?